Welcome to this explainer on John Cantelow's completely groundbreaking paper. We are going to completely rethink how we study extraordinary conscious experiences. We're talking about those wild, profound, and honestly often inexplicable boundary experiences of the human mind. Near-death states, out-of-body experiences, the whole shebang. And we are going to look at them through an entirely new scientific lens. So let's dive right into this by asking the ultimate question about these boundary experiences. What is the universal thread? Seriously, if you read the reports or, watch interviews with people who have actually had these profound experiences, you'll hear a ton of incredible, highly specific details. But when scientists try to find the one single thing they all share, they hit a massive wall. And this brings us to what's called the content variation problem. It basically proves there's absolutely no universal thread if we're only looking at the subjective contents of these experiences. Think about it. One person sees a classic tunnel of light, right? Another person has a spontaneous life review. Some people encounter entities that conveniently perfectly align with their specific cultural or religious background, while others experience totally altered time. Because these contents vary so wildly, trying to build a universal scientific framework based on what people see, it's incredibly frustrating. Okay, so here's our roadmap to solve this mystery. First, we'll look at the content variation problem. Second, searching for conscious invariance. Third, mapping out the three regimes of consciousness. Fourth, the power of absence. And finally, redefining consciousness research altogether. Starting off with Section 1, the content variation problem, moving beyond the flashy details. The core issue we have to understand is that focusing on what people see during extraordinary experiences is a scientific dead end, literally, because the imagery is so wildly dependent on a person's cultural and interpretive framework. Treating those varied contents as hard scientific evidence is fundamentally flawed. Look, if you try to build a theory of consciousness around a tunnel of light, what happens when someone from a totally different culture reports an out-of-body state without any tunnel at all? Well, your theory collapses. We have to look way deeper than the imagery. Which brings us to Section 2, searching for conscious invariance, the paradigm shift. So the absolutely crucial pivot here is that we must look for invariance. Now, an invariant is basically an underlying architectural rule of consciousness that stays exactly the same whether you're seeing a tunnel, an entity, or literally nothing at all. Think of it kind of like the laws of physics. A ball might be red, blue, or green, those are the contents, but gravity pulls it down exactly the same way. We need to find the gravity of extraordinary conscious states. Cantelow outlines 6 candidate invariants, and he splits them into positive features, things that always appear, and negative features, which are specific things that consistently vanish. On the positive side, we always have experiential presence, which is simply the fact that experience is happening at all, and continuity, that deep feeling of I am still me. But the negative invariants are fascinating. There's an absence of your normal physical embodiment, a total inability to affect your environment, and an inability to be noticed by anyone else. Whether an experience features a sweeping life review or just a simple floating sensation, these underlying structural rules remain completely locked in place. Let's move to Section 3, 3 regimes of consciousness, mapping the territories of the mind. Cantello proposes 3 primary regimes. First, we have our highly constrained waking consciousness. This one is incredibly stable because, well, it's tied directly to our biological survival. Second, there's an unstable transitional regime, think dreaming or deep meditation, where you're basically fluctuating between ordinary awareness and something deeper. And third, what he calls the fundamental mode of consciousness. This is a surprisingly stable state, found in profound near-death reports where all those biological constraints are entirely relaxed. Comparing these 2 stable regimes, waking consciousness and the fundamental mode, reveals a massive shift. Waking consciousness is an actor organization. It's built for biological survival. You have agency, you're detectable, you act upon the physical world. But in stark contrast, the fundamental mode is an observer organization. In this state, you are completely stripped of physical interaction. You can't touch anything, no one can see you, and yet your awareness and accessibility to experience are actually broadened. It's a total flip in how the mind is organized. To really grasp how these regimes shift without breaking the laws of physics, Cantello uses this brilliant analogy. Painted lines in a parking lot organize cars without adding any physical force whatsoever. Conscious constraints dictate behavior the exact same way. Our waking consciousness feels so rigid not because there's some magical energy pushing you around, but because strict adaptive constraints are guiding your attention to keep you alive. When those constraints relax in an extraordinary state, your mind simply reorganizes into that pure observer mode. On to Section 4, the power of absence, the missing clues in consciousness. This brings us to what I honestly think is the most provocative idea in this entire explainer, the immense scientific power of what is missing. Historically, researchers have obsessed over what people report seeing, but Cantno argues that recurrent absences actually act as strict constraints. They force us to build highly disciplined, falsifiable scientific theories. It's exactly like physics. Knowing what a system cannot do is often way more mathematically useful than knowing what it can do. So the biggest clues to mapping the mind aren't the glowing entities people report, but the universal systematic loss of our physical agency during these profound states. Across thousands and thousands of reports, people consistently fail to interact with the physical world. They can't speak to people, they can't move objects, they totally lack their normal biological drives. These negative invariants are incredibly reliable data points. They prove that the observer mode fundamentally uncouples our awareness from our ability to act. Finally, Section 5, redefining consciousness research, grounding the extraordinary in science. Now, I want to make this crystal clear before we wrap up. Cantilo rigorously maintains scientific impartiality. This organizational framework doesn't break the laws of physics, and it is definitely not a secret endorsement for any metaphysical or supernatural viewpoint. We are strictly looking at the structural reports of human phenomenology here. This isn't about proving life after death, it's about proving that the human mind has a secondary, stable operating system when survival constraints are removed. Instead of viewing these experiences as magic or something supernatural, we must view them as profound scientific perturbations. They are rare, intense moments that peel back our rigid biological programming to show us the raw architecture of the mind underneath. Just like throwing a rock into a pond reveals the hidden fluid dynamics of water through the ripples, an extraordinary experience shocks the brain's constraints, and that reveals the pure observer organization that was always there, just hidden behind our daily survival instincts. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If shifting to the fundamental mode drops our physical agency to reveal a state of pure, broadened experiential presence, what incredible realities are currently being filtered out by the rigid constraints of your everyday waking life? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll see you next time.